So good day, people. I guess this is going to be my last go with Matt regarding this issue on panpsychism, and I'm going to say a couple things here and just try to let this go. So I have enjoyed the discussion. At this point, what I would say is that I don't want to be dogmatic about it. Like, I don't know what the future science will tell. Will there be some revolutionary science that demonstrates some of these claims? You know, Arthur Young, I watched the video that Matt had posted, kind of an older video. He's talking about Henry Bergson, and it makes a claim that protons learn, the sort of learning that goes on in protons. You know, Matt sort of talking about, you know, consciousness in the sun, or the sun having a kind of consciousness, or a rock at a certain atomic level, when you're analyzing it, having something resembling consciousness or similar to a consciousness, or subject to some kinds of experience that amount to a learning and a growth and a development or something like that. As I say, now, it doesn't make any sense to me, you know, and I'm not trying to be rude. I just, you know, it could be a failing in my, you know, my background in some of the science here. My own sense would be that the science would say, no, there's a qualitative and important distinction between the world of inorganic matter, the world that can be fully explained in a reductive, you know, rigorous way by whether it's just going to be Newtonian mechanics or, you know, various laws of physics applied, kinetic potential energy, and even, you know, maybe sophisticated forms of inorganic and organic chemistry, where people are going to be able to account for, you know, a great amount of what happens. Now, I don't think that everything is reducible to that. You know, I think there are very complex socio-historical dynamics, you know, economic relations, like the value of a denarii, you know, that's not going to be subject to compositional analysis. It's not, you're not going to have the physicist come in and explain the value of a dollar by putting the dollar under a microscope, or by somehow looking at the, you know, the dollar is it's a socio-historical event, and it has value in transactions that are determined by all kinds of factors and forces, including the way a particular person values that particular dollar for an anticipated exchange with some other thing. I mean, it's an instrumental value. But I think it sort of cuts more to what I'm interested in here, which is, you know, what exactly are we talking about? You know, what is the point of some of this? I mean, I think, not that it's not interesting, and not that it isn't a worthy debate to go into these sort of cosmological questions, but I think when people ask about consciousness, when they say, you know, when I'm interested in consciousness, and they want to know, how did it emerge, where did it come from, what is its nature, how ubiquitous is it, and this kind of stuff, I think they're thinking along the lines of, well, when I go to sleep and I'm in a deep sleep, there's a loss of consciousness. And then when I wake up, or even when I'm dreaming, but then there's different conscious states, but I'm not always consciously aware that my body is, like, physically always located in space, but consciousness seems to ebb and flow. It recedes, you know, it sort of gathers itself up into a kind of you know, liquidating or self-effacing sort of phenomena, and it emerges. You know, I mean, we're not there self-conscious in the womb going, wow, you know, it's really hot in here, I got to make my way out. You know, I think even there, you know, when you ask what are your earliest memories, the earliest memories, they're not, you know, natal or prenatal, they're way later. Age 2 or 3, things start to come into focus, like you remember something, like you were here and there was something else over there. And what's so fascinating is, as I lose consciousness when I fall asleep, my bodily processes are still going on. Now, so we can get at that at lots of levels. So my body seems to have the capacity to function, to self-organize, to heal wounds, nourish cells, to, you know, work my respiration, my metabolism, all kinds of other things without any conscious direction by me. Doesn't require me to do various things. In fact, you know, it's almost as if they just go on as if they were just what they were, like there's something in the environment, like outside of me, like the blood flows through my veins almost like the water goes down a river. It's like a natural process that seems to be happening independent of me. But in this case, it's different because I am a bounded organism, and my organism as a totality is in fact reacting to it at various levels, even if I'm not consciously aware of it. And this is where I guess, questions like anesthesia get very interesting. Like you can have like a serious surgery where they're going to put you under and monitor you, and it's, you potentially taking your life in your hands. It's a very serious surgery to be put under, and it has to be, again, monitored and really taken care of. Now that's very different than like a local anesthetic where, you're going to have like a skin cancer removed that you may be fully consciously aware, but they're able to like neutralize the reactive tissue of your skin. So like your skin, even though we would say I'm conscious of my skin, there's a sense in which the use of local anesthetics remind us that things like pain is a kind of an awareness there at the bodily level that seems to be somewhat different than like my conscious awareness of the pain, like me thinking about it, talking about it, like I'm going to try to explain it to some other person. That's very different than the kind of register of pain that's there. Now, the question would be, is the suggestion that the sun or a rock or a photon, that it can have an experience of pain? Does it ever fall asleep? Does it have does it have fatigue? Without things like hunger and desire and fatigue, or without like what I would call, problems of self-relation, like things like regret and remorse, without the capacity to anticipate, without the ability to ask, have I been compassionate enough? Have I been forgiving enough? Can a rock be more or less compassionate? Can it have a regret? Does it have an appetite? Even at this molecular level, like again, it doesn't really make sense to me. Because I think when people are asking about consciousness, they're asking about that experience of self-awareness that includes all those other dynamics. That is a consciousness that didn't know hunger or appetite or fear, or it didn't have any sense of desire, or it didn't have any objects there that were like evaluatively loaded. I don't know what that is, but it's hard for me to understand the sun or a rock or a photon that way. Could it be in a coma? Like, how about the issue, and maybe my next video, I'm going to have to do a video on psychoanalysis, because I think in some way consciousness entered in a robust scientific way, partly anyway, at least from psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis, one of the key parts of psychoanalysis is the idea that people are driven by motives of which they're unaware. And so self-deception is possible. Like, and that's part of what we mean by consciousness. Now, if somebody wants to say that isn't right, now this, again, we'd have to do a whole video on this. Please, people, if you haven't seen it, you have to look at or go study the book Grooming Gossip and the Evolution of Language by Robin Dunbar. I think Dunbar has shown really just in amazing ways how there are both developmentally for children like a certain point where theory of mind starts to become possible. That is more than just what we could call consciousness, like, or conscious awareness, but there is like that particular consciousness which we seem to be asking about when we ask the question about consciousness, which is this ability to tell a lie, ability to give subjective status to one's own beliefs. Largely, it has to do with the ability to pass false belief tests, like the Sally and Ann test. But, he lays out what he calls these orders of intentionality. And I think, what's interesting is that, yeah, not only do people have the capacity to deceive themselves or to deceive other people, but there does seem to be this sense in which we not only have beliefs about the world, but we have beliefs about others' beliefs. And sometimes those beliefs about what others' beliefs are, what they think our beliefs are. And that sort of like multi-leveled kind of subjectivity that goes on in consciousness, I think that's what people find so fascinating. And that's why it's so strange and it's interesting, and it's an object of great scientific inquiry when you find someone who is for example, a savant, mathematically gifted or musically gifted, but they're on the Asperger scale, or they have, forms of autism that make them in some way, really, atypical. They have sort of atypicality in their neuronal structure, or their brain chemistry, I guess their whole neurophysiology, and yet, some of these people, they don't consistently pass false belief tests. So, I mean, consciousness has many different forms and modes and guises. So, I mean, I guess we want to be, understanding that some of that would be, again, very complicated. But I think the point of psychoanalysis would be that, yeah, without getting at the possibilities of self-deception, I don't know how much we could really get at what we mean by consciousness. I think the last thing I would say, Matt, and this is, trying to wrap up, is that, as I said, I tried to give a shout out to this book, please people, I'm going to see maybe if I can do a video on this just devoted to it, but The Story of the Human Body, this Daniel, Lieberman, it's such an amazing book, and again, I don't want to get into all of that, but one of the things that he points out in there is that height, your height as a maximum possibility is given by your genes. That is, you inherit genetically what your possible maximum height is. But your actual height is not just an expression of those genes. It's not as if the genes just make you the height that you actually become. No, your actual height is subject to lots of environmental factors, dietary factors, and and he's mapping this out just beautifully. And I think he sort of shows that, the question of what is the relationship between natural evolution, modification with descent, and, notions of, those genes that express themselves or get passed on, versus the way we are more or less adapted to certain environments, and then the way that those environments impact what gets, I guess, ultimately expressed and sort of accomplished in an interaction. I think when we take that issue, Matt, I mean, the question I would have you, is that a dualism? I mean, is someone going to say that there's a kind of dualism there implied by the notion that I can have the causality for my height to be both something completely outside of my control and scientifically measured? We can go in and we can look at the genetic expression. But then there is the nutrients that I have, the food choices that I make, the what my parents allow me to eat, don't allow me to eat, and there's all kinds of things that are going on there in the environment, toxins in the environment. But there seems to be so much choice and deliberation. Now, some of it's, I guess, the genes are somewhat similar to the cultural context. I mean, the larger cultural context, we don't really pick our parents any more than we picked our genes. We don't pick, we don't get to choose what they're going to call our diet. But at a certain point, I think we can see that there are very different kinds of causal relations that are bringing about this actual thing called height. And I think we can account for that and realize that there were various indirect choices that as a side effect affect height, but those are related to a kind of agency, sort of in the same way that the actual mating practices of who chose to get together to have you, see, it's buried in there again. I mean, I guess the point would be that the more that we try to just use a scientific account that brackets intention and says, well, we don't have to deal with issues of intention, we don't have to deal with consciousness, well, those don't even make sense anymore, and that's not what we mean by consciousness. What we mean by consciousness are those things where people deliberate, they decide, they entertain possibilities of what might be or could be, and they could fail to have that come about. See, I mean, I think without deliberative fancy, without imagination, and without all those characteristics of pain and suffering and loss, I don't know how that could possibly be consciousness. It seems as if, we could talk about family resemblance. Is there something like the irritability of a cell? Sure. Is there an irritability to an electron in its shell or something. I don't know. That's beyond me. I leave it to other people, and I leave it to future science. I guess my question would be, what is the point of this? I think I'm more interested in the nature of consciousness because I do feel like it's something that is subject to change. I mean, not only do we change our consciousness with certain substances, but we need sleep. Sometimes we're more excited, sometimes we're tired. And so, yeah, you know, Stephen Greenblatt, I think he talks about consciousness as a self-astonishing elemental force. Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of elemental force that's going on in it, and it's self-astonishing, but it has variability. To simply talk about other things, you know, as habit or something, you know, to think of, I guess, the processes by which a rock, you know, maintains its integrity, it just seems so qualitatively different than the way a person does. You know, are you going to have an insane rock? You know, is the sun going to go crazy and need some counseling? Is it going to go into, you know, slip into an irrecoverable coma? And then we could try to look for metaphors of that, but I think that's all we'd find is a bunch of metaphors. Okay, I hope that works. And again, I'm not trying to be dogmatic. It just, as I say, it just doesn't make sense for me because I don't think that it's the question that it's sort of like we're playing a 3-card Monte with what is consciousness. I mean, when people ask about consciousness and they want to know how did this emerge, I think what they're asking about is that particular consciousness that does math, that makes art, that again performs music, appreciates music, has, you know, and again, we could say, well, it actually goes back to all of these other states of being alive. And I think there, yes, it's easier to chase down. And certainly, are animals sentient? Yes. And do they have, you know, awarenesses and belief states? Yes. I think, you know, Robin Dunbar's work shows pretty conclusively that, you know, as you move into primates, you're getting second and third order intentionality. I mean, they have beliefs about beliefs. You know, they're aware of, you know, they know how to make tactical deceptions. Very sophisticated, very sophisticated. But that's sort of what we mean by consciousness. I don't know. When you move down and they don't have any of those dynamics, I'm not sure what that is. Okay, so I'm going to be doing some other videos. I'm going to try to shoot a video sometime soon on Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth by Harding, which is just such an amazing book. Maybe talk about headlessness for a while, and also this Story of the Human Body. But we'll see. Maybe I'm going to try to talk a little bit about psychoanalysis in the upcoming video. Okay, good to see everyone, and hope everyone is well. Take care. Bye.